Welcome back to the Dungeon Master's Block, the place where we come to talk about the Dungeon Master, the most important person in the game. With every conversation, we hope to inspire as many as possible to keep on Dungeon Mastering.
I'm one of your hosts, DM Neal, aka Jote Maniac, and today, DM Mitch and I sit down with isFriday to talk about the idea and a lot of ins and outs of potentially becoming a pro GM, and some of the ways to do that. It's a great episode full of tons of advice, and rather than listen to me talk anymore here, you can listen to me talk more over there when we head to the meat.
I'm starving. We ain't had nothing but maggoty bread for 3 stinking days.
Why can't we have some meat?
Looks like meat's back on the menu, boys.
So today, for the meat of the episode, we have another special guest. And today we have isFriday, and one of the absolute best people on Twitter. If you are not following them, you are not doing yourself a service, because they're giving amazing advice on making money as one of the top-ranked pro GMs out there through podcasts, newsletters, maybe regular mail letters. I don't know. We'll find out soon enough. But Friday, thank you for coming on.
Thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here. I haven't been sending out handwritten letters, but I suppose, maybe if I get an assistant at some point, maybe I will have them do that or something like that. But I don't have an assistant yet, and it wouldn't be very efficient for me to handwrite some newsletters.
Assistant to the regional pro GM.
Yes. It's possible that people may only be receiving them. I say this as one of the podcasts we recently found out there are still millions of AOL subscribers. So if there may be an untapped market of people that are only receiving letters.
Interesting. I wonder what their open rate is like.
I want to know so much. I don't. Yeah. I close that door in my mind so that I don't fall deep within that rabbit hole, likely becoming an AOL member myself. So we'll skip that.
So Friday, for those of us who maybe aren't, as Neal said, following you on Twitter, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself? What is it that you do? Maybe some the things that you really love in life. Just tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I am a game writer, designer, and I am kind of a project manager as well as a marketer, copywriter. And then my actual job is being a pro GM. So I'm a full-time pro GM. That's how I pay my bills. And everything else is kind of like my own business hobby. I suppose everything falls under my LLC, but yeah, the pro GMing is really what brings the money in for now. And it's like my day job. So
yeah.
That's such an awesome sentence.
That's the opposite of most people's sentence, right? Right, Neal? Yes. Like, my actual job is this.
Yeah, that's very common in tabletop, actually. That's one of the problems with the tabletop industry that I seek to address for as many people as possible. It's one of my platform's goals to get as many people to a living wage as possible that want to work within tabletop.
That's awesome.
And part of that is really just providing a lot of people enough stability to be able to pursue hobbies that they would like to do within the tabletop industry, whether it be game writing or game design. A lot of the time, people feel like they are restricted by their trying to pay their bills in other ways, or their mortgage, or supporting their family, rightfully so, because it is tough times in the economy, wherever you might be in the world. It feels like everywhere is getting more expensive. And I'm not necessarily saying that you should dedicate yourself to work or only dream of labor. But for a lot of people, if you could make money running, D&D games or whatever have you, like Project Black Flag, then you probably would like to. And then you can use that money for either peace of mind. You can help pay off some debt. I know a lot of people who are in less fortunate situations, who are marginalized individuals, whether they be on disability or are otherwise unable to seek a workplace outside of their home. So if someone is stuck at only a remote location, they can find that being a pro GM is actually a very good option for them if they can kind of stomach all the other business aspects of it, because there is definitely a business aspect to it. It's not for everyone, but I would say that if you're a pretty good GM and you've run 100 to 200 games, then I think that you're probably qualified. I say probably because I know plenty of pro GMs that probably shouldn't be pro GMs. But, it's a good shot that if you're just a nice person and you're also a decent GM and you're a decent host, you can probably make at least some money to help ease some of the stress that you might be feeling in these tough economic times.
There are so many follow-up questions, but the one I will say is you mentioned Project Black Flag, which I think leads really well into our second interview question, and that is there anything that you're currently working on? And the caveat that we always get to put is that you can tell us about.
Well, sure. I didn't NDA myself for my own project, so...
Great choice.
Yeah, and the only NDAs that I have to abide by are in relation to anything involving like the Project Black Flag playtest. At the time of this recording, the second playtest packet for Project Black Flag has dropped, and they will continue to drop. My team and me, we get them a couple weeks, sometimes sooner than that, in order to sort of start designing our book to fit within the realm of possibility or the same time window as releasing at the same time as the new core books that Kobo Press is releasing for Project Black Flag. For us, we are going to Kickstarter April 3rd. And if you go to vineyardrpg.com, regardless of when you listen to this episode, it'll take you either to our Backer Kit page or our Kickstarter if it's in progress, and you can kind of check it out. The Vineyard RPG is a setting and campaign book focused on what corporate greed looks like in a fantasy world. The Vineyard is an undead criminal organization which expands its influence through monetary debts, blackmail secrets, and political manipulation. Our book features 9 compelling villain dossiers outfitted with a biography, plot hooks, lair, stat block, all of which you can integrate into over 20 locations. You can resist the undead corporate greed by fighting their influence, or join them by signing a contract to expand your power for a price. You can trade your darkest secrets for boons from their majesty, and you can unlock your dreams and nightmares alike. So we have a massive team. We have over 20 S-tier industry pros. I'm very proud of the team that we have been able to bring together. And they have submitted some of the best art and the best writing that I've ever seen in my life in any tabletop game. And I'm very excited for people to see it. We will have a preview adventure on the Kickstarter page the day that we launch, April 3rd, for everybody to check out.
I got to say, you kind of had me at undead corporate greed. That pulled me in for sure.
Yeah.
The natural evolution of America.
And I've seen it. Okay. This is a really deep cut, and it may be too close to my own personal friend group, but I'm going to say it, and we'll go from there. So Warhammer 40,000, the theory is that the Emperor is still alive on a throne of souls. My in-world assumption is that Sam Walden is also doing the same thing. And just is still living on a throne of souls. That's how Walmart is still taking over the world. So, yeah, I'll plant that seed for whoever wants that.
Yep. Yeah, I mean that's a pretty good plot hook for like a modern RPG, I would think. If you wanted to resist the man being Walmart, and I think that might actually fit into like maybe like a Kids on Bikes campaign or something like that, or.
And then you already have the structure of bosses, the literal bosses that you have to go through to complete the quest. Oh,
yeah,
no.
yeah.
This is too much. I'm going to write it all down. Oh no.
The lieutenants that we have. So we have the big boss, and then we have the lieutenants available for the table to interact with. We have sort of actionable plot hooks that people can get seated in early on, and there's lieutenants who started working for the Vineyard because they owed a debt, and then some who are willing, like sort of embracing the entire lawful evil aspect of it. The way that our contracts work is, I think, very interesting, and I don't want to talk too much about the book itself. I mean, you can find out more information at vineyardrpg.com. But our contracts are being developed by Legal Kimchi, if you're familiar with that YouTuber. He's one of our writers and sort of developed with us. And I remember discussing these ideas with Kimchi, and when I was describing, like, hey, I have this great idea about how evil this would be. And he was like, yeah, that's like a less evil version of De Beers, or a less evil version of this other corporation that I know about, because he works in intellectual property. in the real world as an attorney. So he's very familiar with sort of how things are structured and how to provide these contracts. So we're going to have boilerplate contracts, and then we're also going to have story-oriented contracts for people to enjoy and introduce to their players and use as a plot point.
Fantastic. Well, we like to have a surprise question for all of our guests when they come on. So we've got one for you today. So Friday, the surprise question is, if you, Friday, were a character in an RPG campaign, what would your weapon of choice be and why?
I did Filipino knife fighting for a while, so I would imagine that would be a good option for me. But I also really like the idea of like a warhammer because I am good at swinging a baseball bat from growing up in America. Yeah. So
nice. I mean, you could switch it up every now and then, right? Those are your two. When you need to really send a message, out comes the warhammer. When you want to be more subtle, you've got the knives. I love it. Thanks for answering that surprise question.
So we've touched on the main topic a little bit, and it's such a robust topic. I almost don't know where to start. But a conversation we were having kind of just before we hit record. I think a good place to start is to start. What? Now it sounds dumb because now I'm going to say a good place to start is start playing. If that's not ad copy that they use, it definitely should be. But it's probably one of the most forefront platforms in terms of pro GMing, in terms of its inclusivity, its openness to the list of just general games that it has already set up, and just kind of how well known it is. So I think that's probably a good place to start. Is what are some key pieces of info about Start Playing, both as a company and a platform?
Well, I would start at the beginning and what I know of Devin and his partner Nate, who they met up and they had this idea that they wanted to work on back in 2020. And it was basically their invention from Devin's point of view. He was a pro GM in the San Francisco area, and Nate was basically an engineer, a developer that wanted to resolve this problem. And the problem was I can't find a GM, especially in COVID. So they went around and they made these connections, and I don't know anyone who can really compare, at least in that space, with Devin in marketing. Fantastic marketer, and the ability for him to like meet people and just be very earnest. And he feels to me, as you know, my experience with him and Nate just being on the platform, wonderful leader. The safety team is really incredible for GMs and players alike. Any sort of claims of abuse or any problems are investigated really thoroughly, and they do their best to be able to sort of make this unwieldy platform not a cesspit, and they do a really good job. You might have varying results if you go like hang out in the Discord too long or whatever, but I mean, for the most part, startplaying.games is a really great platform, and not to say anything negative about them. They're a very small company. They work really hard. I love working with them. And I would say that in general, it is the best place to find a game to play or to run a game as a GM. One of the things that they handle for you is they will handle the money. So you don't actually have to have those sort of awkward conversations with people like, hey, PayPal me this or whatever. You can just stick to the policy. You have like 24 hours before a game where people get locked in and they've reserved their seat. And then it'll run their card anyway. And if it doesn't work, then Start Playing Games deals with them. Like they talk to Start Playing Games to be able to resolve their card issues and things like that. And taking that sort of thing out of the equation for the personal relationship you're trying to build with your players is a huge bonus. It's a huge benefit of the platform. And not only that, but they do advertise outside of their website to bring people to their website. And once they bring people to their website, as long as you've done your due diligence to be able to understand the advertising on the platform and how their marketplace works, then you can fill games and you can start earning a living wage there.
I had mentioned previously that I have some experience because, I mean, I guess the long story short, I mean, people could eventually find this out and I don't have a problem discussing it, but I got laid off a year ago. And it is what it is. And the idea of potentially adding pro GMing to that living wage, because right now my wife is doing fantastic. And just generally speaking, she loves her job. I explained, no, not everyone does that. And she was surprised to find out that that was true. Most people don't enjoy their day-to-day job, but she does. So the idea of adding that, and I think the way to frame it is that living wage, not the idea of I'm not going to become the wealthiest person in the world, but then my mental and possibly physical health is going to go higher because now I'm not going to a place that is slowly sucking my soul out.
Yeah.
And instead it's something that I genuinely already enjoy to do. And one of the things is, because there are some stigmas around it, and I think we'll probably get into that conversation, but at the end of the day, there are people willing to pay for this service and people that are willing to provide this service and start playing in other sites like it are just connecting those two people.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a lot of things to be said about providing this service to people who are marginalized, because a lot of the time, if you're a marginalized individual where you belong to the queer community, or you're BIPOC, or you are disabled or anything like that, or you're neurodivergent, it's very difficult to find people that you're going to enjoy playing with. So allowing these players to find GMs who are like them, or who are very inclusive for whatever their identity might be, or their their situation, or their schedule. Let's say that's the biggest problem for everybody is scheduling, right? Finding a game that works for them remotely on a schedule that's going to work for them. That's really what it's providing. It's providing both the convenience and the safety at being able to find people that you're going to enjoy playing with, and not just resorting to like showing up to the hobby shop and then like, okay, well, I don't necessarily want to play because I don't feel good about, like, I can't get sick. Or if you're going to the hobby shop and then you just have one sort of demographic, if you live in an area which doesn't have more people that you think that you'd enjoy playing games with.
Yeah, scheduling is the bane of all GMs and players out there, isn't it? So, Friday, just for our minds of what this looks like for you as a professional GM, are the mass majority of games that you run, they are over something like Zoom or like some sort of video chat service? Do you do any GMing like in person? What does that look like for you?
So a vast majority of my games are online through my Discord server. I have a community there. I think we're almost up to 400 people right now. I don't run games for 400 people, but there's pro GMs who join my community who are interested in like chatting with other pro GMs and improving their business, so on and so forth. And then friends, people I've worked with, so on and so forth. But for me, it's normally video chat in the Discord. We have a boosted server, so it's like a little higher quality. And I run my games right now through Foundry VTT. I'm open to other VTTs. No one has sponsored me, so I mean, I don't think it would be worth their money to sponsor me anyway. But it's not like I'm gonna, not at this point anyway. I don't have enough influence. That being said, when I do say stuff, like, people try what I tell them is a good product. So I have realized that I have to be kind of careful about which products that I endorse, I should say. And especially because at certain points, people have attempted to leverage my influence without my permission. And that has happened to me now. So yeah, I'm pretty careful about who I endorse. But yeah, Foundry VTT, and I do like Discord for running my games. I think Zoom's good too. I just don't prefer it.
Yeah, the approach that I had in the few games that I had gone through was the same thing. Added to a Discord, then you're already in that community, and you can see more people joining that community. And there's a lot of interesting pieces that I'm already picking out. One is the making a community where GMs can talk to other GMs, because that's one of the biggest things about this show is a lot of people don't have anyone they can talk to about running their games, because the only people that they know that enjoy their games are their players. And that's not the conversation that you get to have, really, because you may, show too many of your cards. The other thing I had, for whatever reason, hadn't quite thought of was the idea of remote games and being able to play them and find these pro GMs is the socioeconomic scale that gets involved. Because if I live in a rural community, my options are very limited. It could be that everyone I go to at the game store looks exactly like me, but I don't like them. And that's fine. I'm not saying that that's a bad thing. That's just a reality, is that there's such a limited number of tables that I could then have access to, and those tables don't work for me. But now I can go online. Or like you said, what if I pull Graveyard all the time?
Yeah.
Nobody wants, gamers notoriously, we could probably, as a collective unit, we could probably pull that off. But the idea that I could then just, is it someone that lives in the UK who's consistently running games at a schedule that works for me? I get done with my graveyard shift, I log in, and I just start playing. It's interesting the benefits that are there. And again, I don't think anyone on this podcast is claiming that this is for everyone on either side of that screen, but there are so many people that it can be for, that just promoting the idea and just the overall structure, I think, is a really, really good thing.
Yeah, it definitely, that is 100% true. If you work graveyard, you're probably going to end up with a bunch of Australians or a bunch of Europeans in your game. I know that's what happens in my games when I run them super late. Like I have a 9:30 Pacific game and it's full of, Australians and Europeans. But yeah, it's great for a good number of reasons. And especially if you want to run games during the day, you'll find that some people actually who work at home, who are working remotely, they will pretend to be at work while they play D&D with you. And, so I mean, like, I'm not saying you should if you're at home and you're listening to this and you work from home, but I mean, you could. You could, though.
So a piece of advice that I have definitely not used on a personal basis, wink, wink, is that when you need to put something like that in your calendar, it's super fun to just put board meeting because you're playing board games at your lunch on a regular basis.
Yeah.
So I'll just
No, that's
Go
cute.
ahead.
I love it.
Yeah. I just imagine all these people just putting in like a 4-hour block that says board meeting. No, sorry. I'm very busy.
Yeah, I honestly, I think it's really funny when my players tell me like their excuses if they do play with me during a daytime game. So some people have like stuff blocked off and they literally put it in their calendar as though that they have set times that they do go to meetings and their meeting is just D&D. Or I have players who set it out in their calendar as mental health or therapy or something like that. I'm not a therapist. There are some DMs who are therapists who practice and like who use that sort of therapeutic play. I am not, but I mean, like, I'm not saying that they're bad people for lying. I'm just glad that they're playing with me, so I'm not complaining.
I'm sure that does open up for you as when you're GMing those games. I'm sure that has led to some challenges. I imagine that there have been times where you have been running games for a number of people, and whether it's somebody is actually supposed to be at work and in the middle of the game, it's like, oh, I actually have to hop off for like an hour, or even if somebody is planning on playing and that's their amount of time, but then they have to jump off. Is there any advice you have for GMs out there who, when that kind of thing might happen, what do you do with that kind of a challenge?
I would say, and I've had this question pretty frequently in my Patreon Discord. So I think for the most part, if you were looking at targeting an audience that is going to be playing during US daytime and you were targeting Americans who are playing while they're at work, I think probably it's better to just shoot for like an hour and a half or 2-hour games that are really focused. And you get in, get out, like you play the entire like time, and then you get out and like you cut table talk and you cut everything else. And when you arrive, you just play. And then if people want to show up early to hang out, they can. But that's what I would recommend. I kind of run the opposite sort of game because I run in the evenings US, for the most part, afternoon and evenings, in which people show up. And I have like a gossip time from like 20 to 60 minutes as average now. I started it just because I was trying to sort of increase the familiarity with between players and like to sort of bond more, digitally, because that can be kind of difficult even over video. But what it ended up bloating out into, like I started with just talking about me being on dating apps again, because I was like newly single after being married for so long, and I was like just talking about like me being on dating apps and look at what this weird thing that happened on this dating app. So I'm sure a lot of your listeners have experience with. And then everybody, like when I started sharing more about myself, then more people started sharing. So it really depends on everybody's comfortability, and that's sort of what works for me. Not every business plan works for everybody. Some people are more drawn to they show up, they play, and then they leave, and it's completely transactional. And that's okay. But yeah.
Yeah, that is one of the key benefits on its base level. And it's not the funnest thing to talk about, but the idea that every person has paid some amount of money to be there at the end of the day, that is a literal investment. So then typically the mental investment kind of comes along with it. Kind of to move into another thing that's come up a few times, because I think it is possibly one of the most underlooked and most important pieces, is that at the end of the day, you are kind of, if not completely, turning yourself into a business entity to really get this going, to be kind of consistent. So I did not set that up well as a question, but the idea of how does a person start broaching the idea of becoming more of that business entity, because you are trying to sell yourself running games to attract more players.
I think the most important thing for you to be as a professional GM, especially when you're starting out, is being professional and consistent. And if you're professional and consistent, then a lot of the other problems just don't exist, because you have to be, unfortunately, in the world of freelancing, shout out to my freelancers out there, you have to be incredibly consistent because your reputation matters a lot. So if you don't show up for games, you cancel too frequently, or like something like you're not on it, you're not on it on the ball when you're running games, people will go elsewhere. And that's one of the things that really separates pro GMing from a casual environment, which can hurt your feelings, but at the same time, it's just business. So I have games still that fall apart. I just had some games fall apart like this past week. And I know part of that is because, I haven't perhaps been running as good at games or something. But that's okay, because when push comes to shove, like, people, if they have a choice and something comes up in their life, they can schedule around their game, or they can keep your game. And a lot of the time, the sort of measure of success that I would say for most professional GMs is when people leave your game, do they say that they want to come back? Do they say that they want to try a game at a different time and place? And it's also good for you to keep in mind as a pro GM, like, you are the consistency for the game that they want to play. And a lot of people who are seeking out these remote games don't have that consistency in their life. So a lot of the time they will only be able to play for like 3 to 5 weeks or something, or sometimes even less, before their schedule changes. And then you have to rotate them out and then like bring somebody new in and stuff like that. So as much as possible, like you after a while, you get sort of used to that. It can really hurt at first, but you get a little bit more used to it. And that is not to say that you enjoy the process less, unless you're being overworked. If you take on too much work, then that's a totally different conversation. But yeah.
The other thing I was thinking, because I feel like you're alluding to it a little bit, is the idea between a campaign versus a one shot, which I feel like we're very different approaches potentially, or both short and long term, obviously. So can you kind of speak to the difference between setting up a campaign that you would run consistently online versus a one shot?
Yeah, so a one shot, you're going to have a very tight sort of turnaround for players. A lot of the time, I need to talk about like the ecosystem first, so that you understand like the player behavior. Because one of the most important things to understand as a professional GM is, what is the marketplace? What is the client behavior? What is like the buyer behavior in this marketplace? And most people join a game 1 week out. So it's, or I should say 50% join 1 week out and 50% join the day of that a game is going to be run. People do not join a game if there's nobody at the table already, and they'll see X of 6 seats or whatever when they see your advertisement. And it's very important that you try to get your initial 2 to 4 players before that final day comes up. And if you do that through either your community or through outreach, if you can, or through people that want to play, or you utilize something like a seat filler, which is something that a lot of pro GMs do, then that is going to help you get to where you need to go. Now, briefly, a seat filler is like a friend that you have that you trust that's going to be fun at the table. They get a free game. They help you manage the newbies. They help you manage like running your game well. They interact with people. They create a better experience. So it's really like part of the package of being in a pro game is like, that at least one of these players is going to be awesome, and they're really improving the experience for the rest of the players. I would say the difference between running a one-shot and a campaign is that last time we got any data from Devin about that, is that it was 75% of the players that sign up for games on Start Playing Games are campaign players. The bookings, I should say.
Oh,
so
wow.
the bookings is 75% campaign, 25% one shot. So your market is much smaller. And if you're trying to run a game other than the Big Dragon game, it can be pretty difficult. And I believe right now, last time we checked on data, Devin shared that it was 70-30. Big Dragon game, 30% everybody else. So it really depends on like what your model is and how you would like to reach your audience. It can seem very intimidating to try to run something other than the Big Dragon game, but you can do it in limited quantities, I think, especially if you double down on your marketing. You allow your copywriting, which is the verbiage in your title. You allow your thumbnail to tell the story of what the game is. And you create a good advertisement so you can distill the process down to as simplistic as possible for someone to understand what the experience is. Because when people go and they click on an advertisement, they're not looking for the lore dump that you provide them as a handout. They're looking for or thinking about what is this experience going to be like. So they're thinking about like, when I sign up for this game, is it going to be funny? Is this going to be scary? Is this going to be very mechanically heavy? You need to be able to explain that in your advertisement. But yeah, I have an article written about that, which kind of breaks that down. Amongst other things, I have a bunch of other articles about pro GMing. But yeah, it's important that you sort of tighten that up because sometimes it can take a few weeks for your game to fill. And then once you have your group together, you run the best session zero that you can in order to retain those players. And then you just try and keep that table together as long as possible, at least the core group. You might have 1 or 2 rotating seats. That's pretty normal. It's like the 6th seat is always like rotating, or the last seat in your campaign. And then the last thing I'll say about like one shots to campaigns, some people naturally think about one shots as an advertisement for campaigns, but that's not the behavior of the clients that we found on Start Playing Games. One shot players are one shot players, campaign players are campaign players. So when you put out a one shot and you attract an audience, those people normally do not have a consistent enough schedule in order to play consistently in a campaign. So it might seem like a good idea. However, it's not actually in actuality the best idea. Most campaign players as well are not going to go over to the other side of the fence on the one shot. They would much rather show up and then in their first session decide whether or not they want to stick around rather than trying a one shot that is unrelated to the game that they want to play. Because every campaign player is looking for that magnum opus campaign that they can just join and like, I'm going to be playing with my friends for 3 years, which doesn't happen very often. But I will say that I have had some tables since I started about a year ago that have been together for a year. So it just depends on like if you find that really just that good fit or not.
First off, most of that, the information provided was not difficult. It's just so much of it felt kind of counterintuitive to the way I would have thought. Because as you were describing the percentages, my head was definitely going to say, okay, 70% are totally one-shots. No, those are campaign players. And it just kind of shocked me because that wouldn't have been my assumption. My assumption would have been kind of the people that don't necessarily have the time, or, you know, let's say it's my players and we're only meeting monthly. So they kind of want to supplement their TTRPG experience by getting some additional games in on our off weeks. But it also starts to make sense because of that, you know, again, we're at the end of it, it's still a monetary transaction, but having a game where every Thursday at 6, apparently every time Critical Role's on was immediately where my head went, we're going to play.
Yeah.
And it'll be every week in the idea that, you know, my table is probably only going to see 12 sessions within a year. But again, with this transaction, we could easily see 52 for the campaign. And, you know, the idea like, well, the campaign may not need to run as long because, hey, we're all actually showing up and actually going through the campaign and actually doing stories. Yeah, like I said, the information isn't necessarily hard, but I think there are a lot of counterintuitive pieces that a person needs to kind of work through to really get it going.
Yeah, absolutely. Shout out to Joe for my Thursday night campaign who ran into Sam Riegel while wearing his Critical Role sweatshirt, who plays with me Thursday nights, who talked to Sam Riegel about our own Critical Role game on Thursday nights pretty recently. But yeah.
Yeah, he asked Sam if they could move theirs because it's really conflicting. So.
Yeah.
Do you find that since your players are like they are paying for the game to happen. Do you find that the commitment level is more there in general with pro GMing?
Yeah, I would say so. Definitely. I think that there's a couple of phenomena that I did want to mention briefly, and not to dissuade anyone, but a lot of GMs who come into the space for their first time, they're not quite, they have a lot of imposter syndrome, which I totally understand. And I struggle with that myself a lot of the time. They come in with imposter syndrome and they're like, I'm not going to charge very much. I will charge $5 to $15 a seat or whatever, which is below the median. The median price right now on Start Playing Games, last time that we received data from this, was $19. So that's the median price. So I don't think anybody should be starting below the median, in my opinion. If you have the call to be able to try and run games professionally and you're putting stuff out there, you need to start at $20 a seat, in my opinion. Because what that's going to do is it's going to cut out all of the people who are less interested in being serious about it, or who are going to disrespect your time. What we have found in the Pro GM community is that people who pay less actually respect you less. So they will come in and they will be rude and they will be more demanding and they will be like, there's just all of these additional things. It's kind of this odd like system that you have to charge a little bit more in order to have people like sort of take you seriously. And you have to slam your flag into the ground and like draw a line in the sand. My professional business is worth at least this much for an experience. Because otherwise people will kind of see that and internally signal, I suppose, that it's not necessarily worth their time and it's not a big deal if they go in and then they show their, that they just are rude or whatever.
And for those who are unfamiliar, but they're like listening to you talk and like are thinking about this, when you say $20 a seat, is that typically like $20 a seat per hour? Does that change around depending on the GM or the game? What does that look like?
So price is very individual depending on the business. So some people like to price themselves higher because of the virtual tabletop they're using or some of the assets or kind of the full experience. Like, for instance, I use animated maps a lot of the time on Foundry. And then I also provide a full music and audio suite. Sometimes I provide sound effects too. If I think something is if I can't do it with my voice, I try to find sound effects for it. And sort of like that whole experience, I do charge way above the median. But I sort of work my way up to there. Most pro GMs who sort of get that experience, they want to start at probably the median price in order to build up reviews. Verified reviews are very important for the customer experience to be able to sort of be assured that this experience is going to be good for the consumer. So just like we look at like reviews for companies or a product or anything, we're going to look at reviews to make sure that this person has been playing with them for 10 sessions and they say this about them and this has been their experience. People really value those pretty highly. And if you're looking to establish yourself, I always recommend people like cut a minute long clip. They just put the link in their GM profile and they say, "Hey, watch me GM." And then they have this example of someone that is GMing and they can decide right there, do I like this GM or do I think this would be fun? And if they don't, then they don't join and then quit right away. They join and they're like, yeah, this was fun because they know what they're going to get. So reducing the amount of, and this is sort of a sales conversation now, reducing the amount of barriers and misunderstandings between you and the players is incredibly important to retain the players that you want, which is why I build my profile and all of my games to sort of emphasize my style, what I bring to the table, my sort of culture and rules. And I generally don't get a lot of people who come in and are disrespectful or come in and don't understand what it is that I'm trying to do. Sometimes people come in and they really enjoy the game, but they can't stick around. So then they come back a couple months later, they try a different game. So it's all about like providing as much information as possible in as concise a way that's not going to be overburdened, because it's like two different conversations, like your GM profile, which has like your information. You have the game advertisement, which has like stuff about the game to get them excited to join the campaign. Not a full lore dump, but just enough to get them excited to join the game because they think it's the game for them. And then you have like a general player profile that you need to pay attention to. I attract these types of players, and these are the players that I best maintain tables for. For me, I attract a lot of queers, and I did not anticipate that. But because I put my identity out there in my profile, and that's how I sort of organize everything, I attracted a high amount of queers and queer-friendly people. So most of my community that plays with me is, queers. And it's a great experience for me, let me tell you, rather than playing with some people who are not queer-friendly.
One thing you mentioned is like a lot of GMs who start doing this, that they have strong imposter syndrome. And I'm just thinking, like, even putting myself in that place of I'm going to start professionally GMing. I'm going to put myself out there. I'm going to try and run some games and make some extra money and put on a great game for people. One of the worries I would have, I've been DMing for a good long time now, but I'm so story focused. Rules are not the thing that I focus a lot of time on. There's still tons of times where I am DMing and I'm not familiar with the exact rule as written. And there are times as a DM, as a GM, I say to the players, like, hey, I want you guys to, fill me in on what the rule is on that. Since you're playing your character, please know your character's rules and such. But if I were to step into that scenario, I know that I'd have a little bit of worry of, oh gosh, but I don't know all the rules. And I know you were talking a little bit about, putting out and presenting, here is my game master style. But yeah, if I imagine there are other GMs and DMs who are listening right now and having that same thought of, yeah, but I don't think that I know the rules enough. What would you say? Like, honestly, would you say, well, start studying up on the rules more? Like, what would your advice be?
So I would say that if you are below 100 or 200 games, if you're not in that range already, you're not ready to be a pro GM. And that's my honest belief. Some people can learn faster than that, but I think that you really need a very solid foundation, not necessarily of any one system, but you need a solid foundation of dealing with people, being able to adjudicate, being able to be a good host, and being able to just tell a story, and knowing what you do as a storyteller and whether or not that's the best thing for the type of game that you're trying to run. So once you have that figured out and you know more about yourself, then you can move on to pro GMing, in my opinion. I think that a lot of people have those concerns, though, especially about rules. And one of the things that I put in my session 0 is like, hey, I'm pretty loose with the rules like you are, Mitch. And I am cool with narrative over rules. And I put that in my initial conversation that I have with these players that are joining my campaign. And I allow myself to be corrected on rules as written. If we're playing a new game or we're playing a different type of game, I cannot keep up with the 60,000 abilities and spells. Yep. I just can't. And sometimes I make mistakes. I made a mistake pretty recently where I accidentally, I misread or I didn't read a spell properly, and I killed the character. I came to find that out later on, and I'm like, okay, well, we're going to Uno reverse this, and how would you like to adjudicate this? Because that's a very poor experience for a player to have that happen. And that's way less jarring to do that rather than just to be this ironclad, DM gladiator that's never going to be wrong. Yeah, that's impossible to maintain, first of all. And I would have some worries about your personality. But yeah, I think just being open to criticism is very important as well. And feedback, I should say. I solicit feedback from the players all the time through Stars and Wishes, where people tell me hey, here's what I liked. And then if they have any sort of wish for me, they want something to be put into the game, they can send that to me. But I'm very clear that I am okay with rule inquiries. I'm not okay with people telling me how to run the game because, well, I'm in a privileged position in my case, where I don't need any one player. My games fill pretty quickly. So I'm not too worried about that. I'm really established. But I think new GMs can be intimidated and they're very, precious about their players and losing one or two. Every time, I will just say this from my personal experience, every time I've hesitated to kick someone, I have regretted it. So if someone gives me a bad vibe or I just don't think I'm going to have fun playing with this person, I've regretted it every single time. Yeah. You need to maintain the vibe at your table and what makes it fun for you to run the game, also to prevent you from dreading showing up to the game. You want to show up to work and enjoy it, right? If you have a table filled with people that you're just not vibing with, then you just got to let them know, hey, not vibing with the table. Or you can tell them, hey, you don't have to tell them that at first, but you could just tell them, I need to wrap up this campaign. I'm sorry, but we have like 2 weeks else. We'll close out the storylines we've got, and then you move on. I'm not the right GM for you. Anytime I turn anybody away and it's not like some egregious offense or whatever, I just tell them that, hey, I'm not the right GM for you. And that's the truth. I'm not lying to them, but it makes it way less confrontational that way.
Yeah, I think you've really hit on so many big pieces about becoming that pro GM. And, my thought is I don't want anyone to take away your statement around the number of sessions run to be any form of gatekeeping. The second you get behind a screen, and I know we're all agreeing, I'm just repeating this out loud. The second you're behind a screen, you're a DM, you're a GM. That doesn't mean you're a pro GM. And the biggest reason for doing that many sessions is about figuring out who you are as someone that runs the game, because then you're more resolute in those aspects of who you are as a person running, so that you're more confident. And like you said, I'm not going to lie to the person. I'm not the GM for everybody. That's 100% always going to be true. Some days I don't feel like I'm the right GM for the people that are at my home group. It's just how and that's okay, because ultimately you're trying to be the exact GM you're supposed to be and find the players that fit best with that. Not necessarily the other way around, which I feel like is probably what I intuitively would want to do starting out as a pro GM. And I feel like a lot of people would do is to cater too much and give up too much of who they are as a GM to placate in some ways to the groups that they have, rather than setting themselves up again as, no, this is my style. And then in turn, I'm going to attract those players to my tables because I am this kind of GM and I will run this kind of table. And there are people out there that want that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's very important to protect your peace. Like, you need to feel good about coming to work, because then you're going to be able to give your best GMing. When you are feeling good about the game that you're running, you're feeling good about the people that you're playing with, and you're not going to enjoy doing it. It's going to suck it's going to suck all the soul out of it, essentially, if you are just running for people you don't enjoy playing with. And that's the hard truth. You might need to spend some time figuring out, how do I change my advertising copy to reflect the type of player that I want? How do I change my profile, my GM profile and stuff? How do I sort of make it a welcoming and inclusive space for the player that I want to play with? How do I do that? You have to figure those things out, and that's just through communicating more and being and maybe tightening up the way that you are doing your writing and presenting, and then having these conversations with your players and just being a good host. To be quite honest, most pro GMs on Start Playing Games are not professional voice actors. They're just normal people. I say that before I just quote this. My first GM on Start Playing Games was a voice coach. But so I connected with Katie, and I think it was 2 years ago now. And then we ran through an entire Tyranny of Dragons campaign. It was a 1.5-year campaign for us. And one of the things that really kept me coming back was not necessarily she was okay at doing character voices. She was okay at combat, and sometimes would connect with me to ask me for advice on developing combat more. She was an amazing host. So I played with Katie over any other GM on the website, because I was more interested in having that good experience with a GM that I enjoyed playing with, more than the performance of it, more than anything else. So that can change depending on what people's preferences are. But I think being a good host is such a key part of it. And I'm sorry if I just called you okay, Katie, you're great at everything. But I just wanted to emphasize, it's not there's not this barrier between the pro GMs who are making a living wage on Start Playing Games and those who are just starting. It's really just have you built up your business to have a little bit more of credibility through reviews? Have you built up your clientele? Have you built up your community in a Discord server? And that just takes time.
Yeah, so I want to ask you a little bit about what we've kind of started to dive into. And yeah, I think I'd really love to hear just your real honest opinion and your thoughts for yourself on this. But obviously there are GMs, there are DMs out there who they're listening to this and they're going, this sounds awesome. I get paid to do something that I love. Obviously there is, and you've talked a little bit about just even like the, having to work on the scheduling and things like, there are elements of this that are very much work. And I'm sure that you've had times that you've been running a game and it has felt much more like work than it has felt like you're sitting around a table with your friends, you're telling a great story together, and you're just like, you turn off that computer and you walk away and you're just like, oh man, I feel refreshed. How has that been for you stepping into, you start doing this thing that you love professionally? How's that for you for balance? Like, is there a thing that you would even say to some GMs out there, like, yeah, maybe it's not going to be for you because maybe you're going to step into this and you'll start to lose the love of the game? Like, obviously you don't want to dissuade people, but I imagine there's a realistic element of that. Can you talk about that a little?
Yeah, 100%. There are some GMs who are just not going to enjoy doing it professionally, and that's 100% true. I think that a lot of people who really benefit from running games on SPG are people who have worked in a professional environment before. They understand the professional elements that can go into running your own business. Running a business is hard, so I don't shy away from telling people that. I am very direct when people ask me for like any sort of advice or feedback. Generally, most of my feedback and advice like goes into like articles or like Twitter threads or my podcast or anything like that, as opposed to like direct one-on-one, unless you hire me as a consultant, because I just don't have the time. But most people are really surprised that I'm like giving them direct feedback. I'm like, and you're 100% right, Mitch. Like I'm going to tell people you shouldn't be a pro GM. Like if I show up to their game and like they just ain't running like things like they probably should, or they're not caring as much or whatever. And I'm going to be honest, I have days like that too. I have days where I show up and I just don't necessarily want to be at work. But that's not been true for any other job that I've ever had. So I don't see that as like a negative. It's just a reality of life. You're going to have bad days. The difference is, I think, a lot of the time, and I've been very fortunate for the community that I built up for this past year, they support me. And when I have a bad emotional day, I mean, I'm going to be real. I'm a trans woman on HRT. I have emotional days sometimes because I spent my entire life not like processing my emotions. And now I have emotions big time on HRT. So sometimes I just have emotions where I'm just like, I can't run a game today. I'm too busy crying. So I'll catch you next week. And sometimes some of the players show up. I just the other week, we had some players who had some tragedy. I canceled the game and we watched Netflix. Like, so some of this is more akin to running a friendly local game store than any other sort of business. Because when people show up, they're still paying to be there. They're like buying stuff, right? They're still like enjoying it. You just happen to own the place. And if they piss you off, then you can kick them out. So like, you know what I mean? Like, so that's a better way to look at it for most people, I think, is like, I own this friendly local game store, which is my Discord server. You're welcome to hang out. You can talk to me. We can be friends. However, I can't necessarily let you play for free unless you're one of my seat fillers, which I do for like my long-term community members and stuff like that. And like, there's other benefits that I generally recommend that GMs kind of put out there for their community. If they're giving you back money or they're like on your Patreon or something. But yeah, sometimes it's hard. I think for the most part, avoiding burnout is the most important thing. And I say that as someone who just like took a mini vacation for the first time, like in a year. I took like 4 days off for Christmas, and like earlier this month, I took 4 days off and I worked all through 2022. I think altogether, though, it is better to scale up gradually than to sort of jump in and try to run 10 plus games right away. You need to sort of build up your tolerance, build up your endurance, build up games one at a time, really refine not only the game that you're running, because you might want to run the same campaign more than once and be able to reuse that prep material for more efficiency, but you want to refine your marketing copy so that you can bring in the type of player that is going to really enjoy this campaign. And that happens over time. That's why I ended up running like 9 campaigns of Curse of Strahd, because players really connected with me running Strahd because I ran like a fem Strahd that wasn't ableist or racist. And they would come in, they really enjoyed it. And then I just, okay, well, that Strahd table filled. I guess I need to open up another Strahd campaign. Now I'm never running Strahd again. So, but I'm like just starting to wrap them up. You know, I have 2 within the next month that I'll wrap up, and I've already wrapped up 2. So I think just gradually building 1 or 2 new games a month, if you're just starting out, is probably the right pace, because you're going to learn so much running 1 or 2 games, and like you fill a table and then it falls apart. And then you're like, okay, well, what happened? What could I have done better? And then you try another table, and then you try maybe a different campaign, and you see if that works, and you just kind of fiddle with it, and you improve your marketing copy, you improve your process, you improve your session 0, you improve your skills as a GM, and you work through that, and you just build it up over time. I am an unusual case for pro GMing. When I started, there was some information, and that was one of the things that I wanted to address, because I felt like more people should make more money in tabletop. But when I started last year in January, there wasn't really a lot of information available. So when I went full-time in March, that's where I started like running these ad copy workshops where I was helping other GMs refine their advertising copy, because these people were like, how did you go full-time in 3 months? And I was like, well, I just understand copywriting. So that's really what it was. And then I was running a product that people really wanted. They wanted Fem Strahd at the time. So yeah, and now we're at where we're at. I think most people will be pretty satisfied with, even if they're improving their quality of life at home by earning an additional $10,000 or $20,000 on SPG, that's totally doable. I'm kind of an unusual case. I earned, I think, $52,000 on SPG in my first year, but that's like not the norm because I went a little hard. But
well, like just even like as a GM that only runs home games for my friends, I'm hearing you talk, and even though I asked the question, I know, Neal, you have another question, but just, you know, even just hearing you talk, I'm like, well, there are days where I'm going to GM for my friends and I don't necessarily feel like I'm super in the mood to do it. And then I jump in and I have a good time. And there are times where I'm totally in the mood to do it. And then I jump in and it's not everything that I hoped it was going to be. And that's just the name of the game, right? It happens. And so to put that on a professional level, like, I mean, hey, at least you're walking away with a paycheck for it. So that's nice.
Yeah. It is always nice to get paid.
Yeah.
It is always nice. I love that part.
Yeah, because as a person with 2 business degrees, the number of podcasts that I listen to that lean that direction would probably be surprising to most of our listeners. But so much of this leans into that entrepreneurial advice columns and podcasts and approaches and things like that, because you're going to get knocked down. Like that is the truth of what this is. Especially there's a learning curve, and I feel like it can be steep because you're doing something that feels wrong, but I think there's just some hard truths about this process. You're going to do something that you've done potentially for decades that you think you can do in a different way, and that may or may not be true. And the long and the short of it is everyone has the potential to become a pro GM, but it's going to be work. Like because you're getting paid, again, a living wage. So it's going to require work and consistent work, because I never started a job that I was amazing at right out the gate. Right. Because that's not how I wasn't doing that job before having that job. That's how, that's how it works. So again, I really like the advice of starting slower, because there really is so much to learn in that process, rather than I could just imagine me like, yes, I know exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to run 7 Strahds. It's going to be great. I'm super burnt out. I hate everything about this. Never again.
Yeah.
Like, that is absolutely probably quite a few someone's stories. Because it's like, oh, well, I run my home game, but I go to my friendly local gaming store and I run it. And then I run some one shots because people at work wanted it. And, like my significant other has a group of people that are interested in Dungeons and Dragons. And so I tell them that you run it. And so now I've told them that you'll run a game for them. I'm pointing at myself, dear listeners, but which is totally fine. But the idea of then transitioning all of those into that transactional method is something so very different.
Yeah, it's difficult to sort of pinpoint what everybody's personal limits are. And that's really something that you have to find out on your own. That's why I give the general advice of 1 to 2 games a month. Some people can scale faster. When I hit my mark of like earning as much doing pro GMing on the weekend as I did at my regular job, I quit my regular job that day. Don't do that. You should instead save up some money so that when hard times hit, it's not like devastating to you. Because the reality of freelancing, any industry, and especially pro GMing, is that you're going to have hills and valleys. And you're going to have times where I have 70 players. That means 70 people are paying me my rate, which right now is like $40 a seat. And then sometimes I have only 50 or 40 players, depending on what's going on seasonally, or if games fall apart. And then I have a couple of weeks where I'm trying to build another game up to keep going. So that's just life of being a freelancer. And it is better to start gradually and do it gradually for a year before shifting into full time, in my opinion. It's not like it used to be on Start Playing Games where you just open a game and people join. You have to be good at advertising. You have to like refine your copy. You have to be a professional. And a lot of people who are not used to pivoting and being on your feet and understanding the ups and downs of freelancing are not going to be successful. Because if you get knocked down and you lose a couple of tables, well, like it's up to you to figure that out. Like nobody's going to help you do that. You just got to do it. So in being prepared to pivot to a different style of campaign, being prepared to run a different game, that's all stuff that you need to figure out with your strategy. So the general advice that I give for most people that I think is applicable in a useful way for people to think about is that when you're picking your strategy for like, what's my winning horse? Like, what am I going to bet on? You need to pick something that you find to be fun and you're excited about, because that excitement and that passion is really going to come through in the game. So if you're like, okay, well, everybody wants to play Curse of Strahd, I'll just run that. Do you even like Gothic horror? If you don't, then you need to not run that game, because like you're not going to do a good job at it. You need to pick something that you love so that your love can just come through with the game and your passion, and you're going to provide things that other people can't. My friend Kenzie is the best Theros GM in the world because she's a Greek mythology nerd, and she grew up like being in and out of all of those sorts of stories and being really well versed in it. And it really translates well to her being a professional GM. And it's her most popular campaign style for that reason.
So our most important question is, where can people go online to see all the work that you're currently doing, you have done, and of course that you plan to do in the future?
Well, if people want to check me out, they want to listen to the podcast, which is full of advice and just special guests and things like that from people in the tabletop industry and other pro GMs, they can go to dollarsanddragons.com. And that's going to be my newsletter, podcast, and then a couple of links. You can also check out vineyardrpg.com. We hit Kickstarter April 3rd. 2023, if you're listening to this years down the road. So it'll be out there. But yeah, you can go to vineyardrpg.com and it'll redirect you to wherever we're at currently. And yeah, if you enjoy all that, then I am on Patreon. But, that's for people who listen to every episode, I guess. It really helps me pay my editor. I appreciate being able to pay my editor. So.
Perfect. Well, thank you again for coming on, spending some time, sharing a ton of knowledge, and hopefully inspiring some new pro GMs out there. We just want to thank Friday again for coming on, sharing those bits of wisdom. Bits is not enough. That absolute dearth of wisdom about the ins and outs and some of the ways that a person could become a pro GM. And as always, if you have anything that you want to get a hold of us to tell us about, one of the best ways is to email us at dungeonmasterblock@gmail.com and tell us whatever it is you want to. And of course, if you see fit, you can head over to Apple Podcasts or your podcatcher of choice, leave us a rating and review, because it always helps. And of course, you can try and find us on the social medias, whichever one we may be on today, tomorrow, or the next day. But right now you can find us on Twitter at DMS_block. And of course, you can look up the Dungeon Masters Block on Facebook or Instagram. And as always, we are a proud member of the Block Party Podcast Network, where you can check out other shows like Detentions and Dragons, Dungeons and Dragons and Daughters, and more. But as always, thank you for spending some time listening to the Dungeon Master's Block, the place where we come to talk about the Dungeon Master, the most important person in the game, the only person capable of playing God, killing characters, and lowering the ego of everyone else at the table. I'm still DM Neal. Good night, good luck, and keep on dungeon mastering.
Goodbye.